Hello, welcome to another edition of the Pace Report. I'm Brian Pace, reporting live here at the Jazz Standard here in New York City. Tonight, blessing the band stage is Hammond B3 organist Pat Bianchi, performing music from his #1 record on jazz radio entitled In the Moment, which is on Savant Records. Now, this album features the great Paul Bollenback as well as Byron Landham, including the great Joe Locke, who's performing here tonight with Pat. We had a chance to sit down earlier to talk about and reflect his origins growing up in Rochester, New York. We sat down and talked about some of his very important mentors, as well as talk about his role playing with the great Lou Donaldson, as well as the legendary Pat Martino. So sit back, relax, and enjoy highlights of Mr. Pat Bianchi performing music from his critically acclaimed album, In the Moment, live here at the Jazz Standard, featuring the great Paul Bollenback, Byron Landham, and the great Joe Locke on vibes. Here at the Jazz Standard as part of the Pace Report, reporting live here in New York City. Pat, congratulations on this brand new recording, In the Moment. And, you know, for years I have followed you. You have played with some of the most important, if not iconic, guys in the game. And we're going to go into that in a second. But you coming full force on being a leader on this record. Tell me what you were thinking about when you went into this project.
First, I was thinking of it being just a couple special guests, you know, people that I like playing with, people I've known for a long time. I think it's important to work with friends. You know, these musicians have been friends for a long time. And it's a project that sort of grew. Started from, I'll have maybe Joe Locke play a couple tunes. Let me ask Pete Bernstein. Let me ask Paul Bollenback. Let me get my guts together and let me ask Pat Martino. So it grew as time went on, and it turned out to be an incredible project in the end.
You know, the B3 is a very unique instrument in that you have to cook with grease. You know, you gotta have a little oregano, you gotta have a lot of paprika. You have really solidified yourself playing with the guys like, say, for instance, Mr. Pat Martino.
Yeah, I've learned so much by playing with Pat Martino, and I think the special thing with playing with such legends as him or as Lou Donaldson, they were there when everything was happening in the 50s, 60s. Obviously, Lou goes back to even further, but to pass that information on to somebody like me directly, it's a real special thing. You know, I mean, I'm working with the cats who helped define this music in a lot of ways, and it's taught me so much.
You started off playing piano. Well, actually, you started off playing a little toy organ.
Yeah.
But piano is where you actually started and got your learning.
I would say actually started playing organ, learning a lot of things. I had an organ with left-hand bass, and this was around when I was 7 years old. It was a keyboard called the Farfisa organ, which was like a poor man's version of Hammond, since they were so expensive back in the day. And so I started learning on that, learning bass lines, tunes by ear, because my father was a musician. He was a drummer, actually, and he would record his gigs playing like big band, dance band kind of things, and I would sit there and learn this stuff. As my parents saw I was becoming a lot more serious about it, then they enrolled me in piano lessons, and that's where things kind of took off from there.
You know, playing by ear, it's different because you pretty much know the parts in your head. How did you translate all of that into your own style? Growing into playing, also learning some of the basics also.
I think, you know, back then I didn't know any better. I was just copying things that I heard. As time went on, you know, especially in playing piano, I had some great teachers who gave me recordings to listen to, and then the pivotal moment being when I was 16 or 17 and I was given Joey DeFrancesco's Live at the 5 spot as a Christmas gift. And hearing that and realizing that's what I want to sound like, or that's the direction I want to emulate and go. So doing that was a huge thing. And then I think as life has gone on, and, you know, time has gone on for myself, it's a conscious decision to not try to be unique and different, just to do what I love to do, and hopefully the music that I love and the things I try to play and sound like that I'm emulating or whatever eventually evolve into something that's my own, you know, without forcing it, so to speak.
You know, it's funny we're talking about Joey DeFrancesco, because I've interviewed Mr. DeFrancesco here a couple of times on the Pace Report. You know, he was a child prodigy, and there have been phases of his musicianship that has just evolved over the last 25 years as an organ player. And he's gone, you know, he's done big band, he's done trio, he's done quartet, he's done basically the whole gamut.
Yeah.
The organ has had a very important fixture on jazz. Explain.
I think, first of all, it's had a very important, how do I want to say, I think one of the biggest things that people can relate to it as they hear it maybe in a church, they've heard it in rock bands. So all of a sudden, if you hear it in an organ trio setting, a jazz setting, or a big band, it's just a sound that's very identifiable. You may not know exactly what that instrument is, but you know that sound. And I think the way organ players play, you know, Jimmy Smith, Mick Duff, Groove Holmes, Joey, of course so many, I mean, they have a way of manipulating the instrument that they can bring so much emotion and convey so much emotion from how that's being played and what they're playing. And I think that's kind of, you know, it's influenced many keyboard players, synthesizer players as well. I mean, it's been so much, and all really basically came from Jimmy Smith, influencing so many people. But it's held a very important place in jazz that way.
I read something very interesting about you. Although you are an organist and a keyboardist, you find and you are digging Brad Mehldau, the pianist. Mm-hmm. And Brad is interesting too because Brad I think he was one of the first guys in the late 90s to start playing modern songs and put in a jazz form.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, with a lot of the Radiohead stuff that he had played, it was, definitely a very different thing than what had happened in the past. For me, I think the draw of Brad Mehldau was first and foremost the melodicism. I mean, when he plays, you don't feel like he's just running a bunch of bebop lines. His lines are something that's so melodic about it, and the way he uses harmony to accompany himself. I remember transcribing some of that stuff, and it kind of blew my mind. And the phrasing was another thing that I loved about him. Just the way he phrased certain things, differently than other piano players at the time were doing. I mean, there's so many great pianists, in the late 90s. Obviously, he just had a unique thing by taking all this different, whether it be classical influence, the jazz influences, and combining to create his own voice. And it just felt like it was so natural and it flowed. And of course, the big thing with him that I love was that era of Joshua Redman with Chris McBride, him, and Brian Blade. That band was probably that band and Joey's trio, Joey Fresco's trio, were my two ultimate favorite groups of that time.
Why Joey's trio?
The chemistry. I mean, the three of those guys together, Byron and Paul and Joey, I mean, they have something so special. It's like, it was just always blew my mind. And for the fact that that CD, Live at the Five Spot, had those three guys on them, on that record, that it was just a special thing all the way through. And that had evolved as well. So I had followed that trio constantly.
And it's ironic that they both on this recording, and they're playing with you. What have you done as far as put your stamp on this trio versus what Joey's done?
Different songs. Band goes in different directions. Of course, I can never replicate what those guys have that's special, but we have great friendships, and we think a lot of the same ways. Of course, for me listening for them so long, that it's just different. It has its own vibe. I don't play all of Joey's lines as well. I never will as well as he plays them. I don't interact the same way with Byron that he does, but I have a different way of interacting. Or Paul has his own things that I'll gravitate towards that Joey won't, or vice versa. It's just a different dialogue altogether.
And tonight we've got the legendary Joe Locke on vibes.
That's a really special thing for me. Joe's from my hometown of Rochester, New York, and coming up, so many cats would talk about, that Joe Locke's going to be in town, because he was long out of Rochester by then, and I had got to heard him a couple times and was just blown away. So that was another one where I decided, I'm going to take a chance. I've always wanted to play with him. Let me call him to see if he'd be interested in playing a couple tunes on the record. And we had met, but we had never played together before. And that's another thing that turned into a really close friendship, as well as a great rapport on stage, because I toured with one of his groups with Marvin Smitty Smith. So we stayed pretty busy doing that too. So the fact that he was willing to come in and join me tonight, I'm just humbled for that all those guys came in and played with me.
Pat, tell me about Rochester. You had some very important training in Rochester, and then you finished and went to Berkeley. What was some of the most important aspects of your learning that you are applying or still applying to your music today?
I think, because I started playing gigs fairly young. I was 13. I had started playing with my father's dance band. I would sub from time to time, and it was knowing tunes, being able to one after another be able to play tunes. Somebody calls a tune, knowing it and being ready, and that really shaped me then, because it helped me build up a big repertoire of tunes and be able to work within the confines of what they were playing. And that was the other thing, play what the gig calls for. Sometimes you'll go out and you'll see people play, not necessarily in a concert setting like this, but they're not necessarily playing what the gig calls for. And sometimes that's really important to know where you fit to make the music sound the best without having to show off or play all your hip things or whatnot. That was really important. And then later, as my teenage years, I had gone to this jam session every Sunday. And local musicians in Rochester, it was really great learning experience, because I would have to bring a Fender Rhodes. They didn't have a keyboard, they had a guitar player, so I really wanted to play. And there would be plenty of times where I would bring it, and I'll never forget this. I'd get it in the club, sit down and listen, and they'd say, I'm sorry we didn't get to you getting to sit in tonight, but it was good you just sat there and listened, which was a good lesson too, because it's not always about playing, it's about listening, and taking the time to sit there and listen to other musicians play, which I think is really important. And, having all sorts of different kinds of music thrown at me, be able to just adjust on the spot was really an important thing for me as well. So there's so much, that has influenced me, and I think it's just sort of stayed at my core in those ways.
As a band leader, what is it that you are trying to do moving forward?
In terms of the organ, playing organ as a band leader, I think one of the important things is, picking music and musicians that we're picking different compositions that might not normally be associated with the organ context. We're not, see a lot of organ trios playing Humpty Dumpty from Chick Corea or blistering tempos. Playing some of those kind of tunes without losing the essence of where the instrument comes from, and still have the soulfulness, the grits and grease, all, being a very important element within that. Because I've heard some groups that I love, but they leave me cold because there's that missing that element.
It doesn't swing.
It doesn't swing. It doesn't. It's it's missing certain elements of black music that I feel is so important in jazz. Period, and especially the organ. Being rooted in the church, being rooted in R&B. There's has to be those core elements of it. So playing those kinds of tunes while trying to stay true to that feeling, as well as exploring on stage. It's like, for me as a leader, it's like if you feel like you want to play a 10-minute solo and you explore, if the music goes there, great. It's not a pre-programmed show.
viewers out here got to go out and get this album. And on this recording, in the moment, you have a track on here, God Rest His Soul, with the great Kevin Mahogany. And Mr. Fields over at High Note told me this very unique story on how you guys hooked up and recorded this song.
Yeah, well, obviously Kevin didn't live in New York, and I had cut the tracks or parts of the tracks in the summer, and he wasn't able to get into town. So he was it was a celebration at the Iridium for Jon Hendricks. Mm-hmm. And he was actually staying at a hotel 5-10 blocks from where I live, you know. So it's like, you know, Kevin, you know what, I'll just come over, microphone set up, my Pro Tools rig, because I do mobile recording and do all my own things with Pro Tools. We'll record it in your hotel room. So we recorded that track one take in his hotel room over on West 94th Street, and that was it.
And you know what's crazy? I was there. I did a big piece on the Jon Hendricks. That was the last time I saw and hung out with Kevin Mahogany for those 2 nights.
Same here. It's the last time I saw him. We stayed in touch a little bit via email, but he was, you know, going through some changes, and he had moved back to KC. Yeah. But, you know, I mean, but I was blessed that I had got to work with him a number of times in the past, both on gigs, and we had taught a number of jazz camps together as well. So he was another person who's not only an incredible musician, but a great friend.
Papa Lou Donaldson. Now, my foray into his records were the Jimmy Smith records. My grandfather was a really big Jimmy Smith fan. He loved all the organ players, but Jimmy was his dude. Mm-hmm. The House Party record. Yeah. And another record by him was Alligator Boogaloo. And you've played and you've toured with this guy. This man, not only is he funny, but he really brought a very unique vibe to the idiom of jazz.
For sure. I think he was very instrumental in bringing it more to the general public, because not everybody was able to sit there and understand or take the time to understand what Train was playing. Sonny Rollins, same thing, but, you know, by bringing a quote-unquote boogaloo kind of beat, you know, playing melodies, you know, staying soulful. I mean, he brought it, you know, to a different audience, basically. I mean, took music that was happening at the time, what they called the chitlin circuit, and brought it out to the public in a bigger way, which I think is very important.
Because that record is very important, because that record really put George Benson and Dr. Lonnie Smith in the stratosphere.
Yep. I mean, nobody had heard too much of George at that point. You know, of course, well, maybe a little bit before with Macduff, you know, but that record, I think, exploded, made everybody explode, basically.
What's the most important thing you learned from him?
Never forget your audience. It's like in playing with him so many times, he had the same kind of show program night after night, and then I'd do that for a week, and then I would go play at a club in town and play completely different music altogether. You have to have some music that's going to be able to pull your audience in before you go in left field. And if you can get them by playing some music that, you know, get them on your side, so to speak, then you got them. You know, you can play other things and be more adventurous or whatnot. But if you lose them at the very beginning and just play basically for yourself, you know, it's not going to go anywhere. And then I think in a way that kind of translates to making records still. I mean, if you have some music on there that's going to be able to grab people, you know, then that's going to allow you to play some other things as well and present some other things. You know, not only compositions that are far left field, so to speak, just for the sake of, I mean, it's important to be artistic, of course, but you want to have an audience to play to.
And Pat was always really about down home. He and Houston Person were really down home when it came down to the music that they played.
For sure. I mean, Pat talks about, you know, working with Willis Jackson, you know, and the way those, I mean, you know, really play the blues, you know, and then Houston, forget it. I mean, it's all blues right there in tone. Man, that sound, you play one note, it's over.
You know, Pat Martino, he's still amazing at his age. And Pat really sees the uniqueness of what you do and what Carmen does on those drums. And I have to ask you, you know, the chemistry's been there for a long time. What makes you guys click?
Because we're great friends and family off the stage. I think, unlike, with other bands that people have, and even to a certain case, some of Pat's bands, even in the past, where it's like, okay, we're finished with the gig, that's it. All right, see you guys tomorrow. After the gig, when we're playing with the trio with Pat, we'll go hang out at the bar, have a drink. We're touring, we're always joking around, talking. I think that element, first of all, is a very important element, because if that social element isn't there, of being able to connect on that level, then the music's not going to have that same chemistry. And I think also the thing is, which is becoming a rarity too, both Carmen and myself, you learn how to play with other people. Pat Martino shouldn't have to adjust to how we play.
Right.
We should figure out and adjust to how he plays and what he wants as his band. So we took that on and did it in earnest, and support him, play for him. So I think that's another part of it as well. Not just this is what I do and that's it. It doesn't work like that. We're there supporting basically a living master. So we figure out how to make it work and play what he's going to want. So that's important.
That'll do it again for another edition of the Pace Report, reporting live at the Jazz Standard here in New York City. I'd like to personally thank the incomparable and talented Pat Bianchi. Make sure you go out and support his critically acclaimed album, In the Moment, which is now on the Savant Records imprint. Features the great Paul Bollenback as well as Byron Landham, also the great Joe Locke. As always, please visit my website, www.thepacereport.com, for my weekly column as well as my past segments. Again, I'd like to personally thank the staff and management here at the Jazz Standard for their warm hospitality, as well as Mr. Joe Fields over at Savant and High Note Records for arranging my time with Mr. Bianchi. Until next time, remember, if it's in the groove, it'll make you move. Till next time, peace.